Hi guys, it's Misha and welcome back to my channel. Now, I don't usually like to do these back and forth like reaction videos, responses, right? Oh, I'm gonna respond to this guy who's reacting to me, reacting to something else. It's annoying, I don't like to do this, but I had to make an exception for this one because just take a look at the clip.
How do I prove?
My video inspired him to write a song. I have to take a look at the whole video. Okay, so apparently this YouTuber named Ryan Beard, he made a reaction video to my non-binary video that I made like 3 months ago. And yeah, let's take a look. Remember, I want to be convinced, right? I'm gonna have an open mind about this and I want you to convince me that, having this non-binary identity is valid. So let's begin.
Hey, how's it going? So, as you may have noticed, my channel's name is now Ryan Beard instead of Mr. Beard.
Wait, Ryan, can I just say, your camera, like the setup right here, is so good. Just saying.
Today we're going to be taking a look at a video from a woman named Misha Petrov called Why Being Non-Binary Makes No Sense. I don't really like to talk about my gender much on social media because, one, I don't really care that much about my gender, and two, every time I talk about my gender I get a flood of super annoying hate comments, but I think it's relevant to this video to mention that I'm non-binary.
Wait, did he just change his gender to non-binary? Because that would explain the channel name change, right? He said he used to be Mr. Beard, and now it's Ryan Beard.
So today we'll see if Misha here can convince me that I don't exist. Won't that be fun?
Well, you certainly exist. My argument is that the identity non-binary doesn't make any sense.
Before we get into it, I just want to say that I know if Misha responds to this video, she'll say, "Look at this man who's claiming to be non-binary. We can all clearly tell that he's a man." And look, I get it. I am a male, and I present as masculine for the most part, so people's natural first response is to see me as a man.
It's true, but you do have that side part going on, and I'm not saying it looks bad. I'm just saying that sometimes that could be indicative of a social justice warrior from the videos I've seen on the internet. Although I won't label you as such because I haven't heard your beliefs yet, so...
I'm Cody, pronouns em, ers, or zem, zers, or really any neo-pronouns that aren't z, her.
But my internal experience of gender doesn't align with being a man or a woman, so I'm non-binary. Ever since I was a kid, I never felt like I had any sort of connection to masculinity or being a man. I know I'm not going to be able to convince Misha to agree with my opinions because the core of our perspectives are completely different. I believe that gender and sex are different, that gender is socially constructed, meaning that humans created it, and that gender is a spectrum. Misha believes that gender and sex are the same, gender is biological, and gender is a binary. But unfortunately, this isn't something that we can just agree to disagree on because people with the same opinions as Misha are actively trying to take non-binary people's rights away through legislation.
Okay, pause. So what article did he use? What is it saying? Let's see. Okay, so this is from the Washington Post. Anti-trans laws are on the rise. Here's a look at where and what kind. So right in the beginning it says, more legislation has been filed to restrict the lives of trans people so far in 2022 than at any other point in the nation's history, with trans youth being the most frequent target of lawmakers. There are bills aimed at preventing trans girls and women from playing on female sports teams, laws barring trans youth from using bathrooms and locker rooms that align with their gender identity, and restrictions on gender-affirming medical care. Earlier this year, Texas Governor Greg Abbott issued a directive requiring child welfare agents to investigate gender-affirming medical procedures as child abuse, an order that could strip trans children away from their families. Okay, so this article is talking about the investigations surrounding children getting this gender-affirming healthcare, which is actually just mutilating children and experimenting on them. So I wonder, is Ryan in favor of allowing minors to get things like puberty blockers that have been used on sex offenders to chemically castrate them, or does he think that teenage girls should be given access to double mastectomies? Because that's what this gender-affirming healthcare is. It's allowing doctors to medically experiment on children, especially with these puberty blockers which haven't been studied and we don't know the short-term side effects, let alone the long-term side effects. And does he want trans athletes like Leah Thomas to continue dominating their female opponents? I mean, women are losing to biological men because of the obvious biological advantages that men have over women, and that's why it's important to protect women's sports. Is it transphobic to recognize the physical differences between between men and women.
Actively trying to take non-binary people's rights away through legislation. So this is something that we have to fight back against.
Okay, so he wants to fight back against all of that. He wants children to get these puberty blockers and to get these surgeries.
Non-binary people make up less than 1% of the population, so it doesn't really make much sense to expect that your children will be non-binary. I know some people make the argument that you shouldn't assign your child a gender until they're old enough to determine their own gender identity, but I don't know. I think it's fine to assign your child a gender because being non-binary is very rare.
Okay, assign your child a gender. I have a feeling he's going to talk more about this, so I'm not going to say much about that right now. That's not a thing. You don't assign someone a gender.
To me, this argument feels like saying, well, you shouldn't give your child a name because what if they aren't happy with the name you give them? As long as you're willing to respect your child if they change their name or they decide to identify as a different gender, I think that's fine.
I don't think that's a fair comparison, names and genders.
Well, according to Misha, being non-binary actually enforces strict gender roles. It actually does the opposite of that, but we'll see where she's going with this.
Again, I said this in my older video. You can watch it. I'm not going to replay it because that's kind of silly because I already made the video. But it does reinforce strict gender roles because when you take a look at these individuals and their explanation of being non-binary, they describe it as, I don't feel like a man or I don't feel like a woman. So do you feel like you don't have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes? Or what's more likely is that they don't feel a connection to stereotypically masculine or feminine activities or clothing or behavior, which would still be strange. Because all of us as humans have both masculine and feminine qualities. That doesn't mean that we are non-binary. We have a gender. But we see this huge rise in people identifying as non-binary because they see it as, oh, I don't like these things, so I must not really be a woman. And I think that's what they mean in most of these cases because gender dysphoria is very rare. They don't feel a connection to the social roles assigned to men and women. So again, logically, you can be a masculine woman or a feminine man if that's how you feel, which is fine. But you're not non-binary, you have a gender.
Alright, starting off nice and condescending by saying that non-binary people don't even know what it means to be non-binary. People don't
Well, because they don't. They're not giving a clear definition. Look at this definition. A gender identity outside of the binary categories of a man or a woman. Okay, so what is it? But what's a man and what's a woman? Well, I looked through a lot of clips of non-binary parents raising babies or, non-binary children or just discussing their own non-binary identity. I don't like masculine things. I don't like feminine things. I don't feel a connection with boys' clothing or girls' clothing. And I watch all sorts of content from the left, from the right, because I don't want to fall into like this echo chamber, right? I try to look at both sides, and that's just what they say. Like that's how they describe being non-binary.
It's pretty simple, but thank you for being so condescending, Misha. I have no idea what being non-binary has to do with narcissism.
Okay, let me enlighten you then. It has everything to do with narcissism. Now, I'm not saying you, Ryan, specifically are narcissistic, but what I am saying is there is a common trend within the non-binary community that's all they talk about, okay? That is their entire identity, and all they want to discuss with you, their pronouns, their identity. They make it their entire personality. And this whole focus of me having to validate your feelings, you seeking external validation from everybody else just so that you can feel comfortable in your non-binary identity, and if we don't validate that, then we should get canceled, fired. That's what many of these people want to do.
Misha also claims that people are non-binary because they're seeking attention, which is very funny to me because you run a YouTube channel. Your entire career is based around seeking attention. The more attention you get, the more money you make. And it's the same for me as a YouTuber. I don't think non-binary people seek attention any more than any other group of people. And Misha, you running a YouTube channel is much more attention-seeking than some random non-binary teenager putting pronouns in their bio.
And what about all the non-binary influencers who try to reach out to children to tell them, you're non-binary if you feel this way, and every single video is about being non-binary?
There's no such thing as a boy or a girl. Biological sex is fake. Pronouns. So if you were going to talk about me, you would say, Jeffrey is an amazing author. They are really attractive. They being used in place of he or she to refer to one person, in this case, me.
Narcissism is a personality disorder which gives people an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. Me being non-binary does not make me any more or less important than anyone else. Like, it's just my gender. It's like my eye color or my hair color.
Interesting. He compares his gender to his eye color. But I thought that your gender was separate from your sex, therefore having nothing to do with your anatomy, and more so with the psychological aspect of it and how you feel inside. But now you're comparing it to your eye color?
It's about someone's internal perception of themselves. This is how a lot of social constructs work.
Okay, so as you said, I think that we will agree to a certain point about gender and sex, but the conclusion is different, right? So your conclusion is that you are neither gender and that we should just ignore sex, while I believe that sex and gender are the same thing, and that these non-binary individuals are just men and women who aren't fans of the stereotypes associated with their gender. But again, we lose each other because you believe that sex and gender are two different things, gender being something you can't really define well. So of course, I will explain why I disagree with that. So the argument here is that sex is biological, and I'm actually glad that you agree with that because there are people who are saying that sex isn't real either. It's also just a social construct, which is insanity. But you also think that gender is separate from sex, and it's just how you identify. So for you, that's non-binary, and therefore there are infinite amounts of genders. Unless you can tell me a single number of genders. How many genders are there? Which no non-binary person can. Even though sex used to be synonymous with gender. I think it's important to understand where this idea came from, where sex and gender are different, and that of course has to do a lot with John Money. And if you don't know about John Money, I will briefly explain who he is, because I think it's very important to know where this theory originated from, especially if you ascribe to this gender ideology, because this is the man that originally had this theory that gender is a social construct. Okay, so Dr. John Money, who many call the father of this gender theory, was a sexologist and psychologist in the 1950s. And he was all about nurture over nature, and that sex wasn't important and that it all depended on how we raised children, either as boys or girls, and it was all a social construct. So there were these twins, Bruce and Brian, who had some problems like urinating, and they went to the doctor, and unfortunately for Bruce, when they tried to circumcise him, they actually burnt off his genitals. And this mother who saw this very successful doctor on TV talking about how you can raise a boy as a girl, she contacted him and he had convinced her that they should raise Bruce as a girl. So they changed Bruce's name to Brenda. He experienced a lot of discomfort, he got bullied a lot, he never felt like he fit in, and he had a lot of masculine qualities. So Dr. Money tried even harder, and this included taking nude photographs of the twins and acting different sex positions, with Brenda being in the submissive role. So yeah, Dr. Money was a file. He then tried to convince Brenda to have the sex reassignment surgery and even brought in a transgender woman to talk to Brenda about it. The boy went to his mom and said that if he had to get the surgery, he would kill himself. So the mom decided to tell him the truth, that he was actually born a boy. And immediately he felt relief and he felt a lot more comfortable in his body. He even grew up, changed his name to David, and married a woman. But Dr. Money said that this experiment was a complete success and that gender is in fact a social construct. Sex has nothing to do with it. So now David and his twin brother tried to go around and tell people the truth, that it was not a success, speak out against the doctor. Now unfortunately, Brian had developed schizophrenia from all the years of abuse and overdosed on antidepressants. Later on, David killed himself as well. So this experiment was a complete failure. It was child abuse, and instead of learning from that and realizing we cannot be experimenting on children and allowing children to have gender-affirming care, which they can later grow up and regret, instead we have all of these activists saying that Dr. Money was a brilliant doctor who has proved that gender is in fact a social construct. And we have different gender expressions, right? So as he said, you can express yourself as more stereotypically masculine, which Ryan says he tends to do, or stereotypically feminine, which I tend to do. But at the end of the day, we are female or male.
My opinion, the delusional perspective is to act like gender and sex are the same thing, or to act like gender isn't a social construct. What exactly it means to be a woman will change depending on what woman you ask. And I know your response to that would be, actually, a woman is an adult human female. But again, I think that gender and sex are different, and you think gender and sex are the same, and there's not really anything I can say to convince you otherwise.
Yes, I do believe that a woman is an adult human female. Now compare that definition to his definition. Oh, well, a woman is someone who says she's a woman is someone who says she's not a man, and then what's a man? Well, a man is someone who says he's not a woman. Compare that to the actual definition that is based in reality and in science. But of course, regardless, you have to affirm their gender identity, even if it doesn't make sense. Now here's a distinction I want to make when they say, oh, it's all about respect, right? You don't have to understand it. Well, there's a difference between not understanding something and being respectful and then learning about it, and then not understanding something because it's anti-scientific and not based in reality. When your definition of respect becomes having to lie to yourself and to other people just so that you don't hurt their feelings, that's a problem.
I would define a woman as a person with a gender identity on one end of the gender spectrum opposite man. But beyond that, what exactly it means to be a woman is gonna be different depending on what woman you ask. But this is how a lot of social constructs work. And I can turn this exact same gotcha question around on conservatives. What exactly is a conservative? For example, a social construct that's kind of similar to the gender spectrum is the political spectrum, because there is an element of subjectivity to conservatism as a social construct.
Now listen, he has compared his gender to eye color, correct? So what if I identify as having brown eyes? Should you be canceled if you don't validate me? Is it hate speech for you to say, no, actually you don't have brown eyes? Because that's what's happening when someone misgenders somebody else, right? They don't want to use they, them pronouns for singular person. Now you may say those are completely different things, but he's the one that made that comparison. And I'd argue that that comparison makes a lot more sense than comparing gender and political affiliation.
Being non-binary is kind of like being a moderate, because you don't feel like you fall into the binary categories of man or woman. I'm non-binary because I don't connect with the social roles or expectations of being a man, and I don't feel like I fall into the social category of man. Again, let's return to the analogy of political affiliation. You could have two people who share the exact same political beliefs, but identify as different political identities.
That's why we need to go back to sex and gender being the same thing, because there's a clear definition in terms of chromosomes, rather than, oh, well, I'm a woman because I like to wear a dress. I'm a woman because I like sparkly things. It's ridiculous. This is literally proving my point. In your own words, Ryan, sex is biological and gender is your internal perception, and it's totally valid. So what if my internal perception of my eye color is brown? I've never felt a connection with my green eye color. I feel like a brown-eyed woman trapped in a green-eyed woman's body. Does that make my identity valid? And if not, why not?
The gender spectrum exists because people created it. You don't get to pretend like it doesn't exist just because it hurts your feelings. The fact of the matter is, gender exists because people created it. And facts don't care about your feelings. Guess what, Misha? If I'm not non-binary, then you're a leftist. I know better about your political identity than you do, dumb. I have no reason to respect your identity. Also, I've decided that your name isn't Misha anymore. It's Bisha. You're Bisha now. And if you don't like being called Bisha, I'm sorry, but the truth hurts, Bisha.
I wonder if he thought this was a genuinely good comeback or burn or something, because this sounds like something my little brother would say when he was like 5.
You believe that you're a conservative named Misha, so you expect everyone to call you Misha the conservative. I'm actually not 100% sure you identify as a conservative, but as we've already established, I have no reason to respect your identity, so I don't give a. You are what I say you are, Bisha.
I've noticed that these non-binary people can get very aggressive and very vocal about trying to defend their identity, right? And that's very common with these individuals who aren't actually confident with their identity. For example, you can call me Bisha, you can call me a leftist, you can call me a man, you can call me a pine tree, but I'm not going to get offended or I'm not going to get aggressive because it's not the truth. You can call me whatever you'd like, but that doesn't change reality. That doesn't change the facts. Because I am in fact a human female named Misha. Who leans right? So why would I get angry? That's the truth. Those are the facts. If you want to call me something else, that's fine. But I don't even feel the need to defend myself because it's silly. But these people get really defensive about their claims because they're not backed by science, because gender is not a scientific term. And he's not saying it, but what I've heard a lot is, well, why do you care? How does it affect you? Well, first of all, it doesn't have to affect me for me to care. That's a very narcissistic way of thinking about it. Oh, if I only care about something if it directly affects me. Well, the reason I care is because this entire ideology is taking away people's freedom of speech, and most importantly, hurting children. There is a push now for gender-affirming surgery to be available to children who are given automatic affirmation from their teachers, from their parents, from their doctors. Meanwhile, we have doctors who are then experimenting on them and giving them puberty blockers. And we all of a sudden have this huge spike in trans children who are predominantly teenage girls, and we just have to pretend that it's not this trendy thing to now change your pronouns and claim oppression points. And what better way to do that than to say you are part of the 1% of people who don't have a gender?
I am not forcing you to do anything. I'm just using my freedom of speech to criticize your opinions. And I don't think that it should be legally required to call someone the correct gender, just like I don't think it should be legally required to call someone the correct name. But I do think that refusing to call someone by their correct gender does make you an asshole. But I'm not gonna get on my hands and knees and beg, please, Misha, please respect my pronouns.
Okay, first of all, can we stick to Bisha? Because it was kind of growing on me.
Please validate my truth. Because I know you're an asshole who doesn't give a.
But many do believe that people should get banned off of social media for misgendering others, or get fired, or get arrested for not allowing their underage children to get sex reassignment surgery.
Language is constantly changing and evolving, and as we gain a better understanding of the gender spectrum, the way we use pronouns will evolve to fit that better understanding. This is just what happens when society progresses. I'm sorry if you had a deep personal connection to the way we used to use pronouns. I feel so very sorry for you.
What's progressive about changing the language to appeal to a small group of people who believe that they don't have a gender?
And if you can't tell someone's gender, just ask them what it is, and they'll tell you, and then you say, okay, cool. I mean, you wouldn't, Bisha, because you're an asshole. Gender is about internal perception, not just about external appearance. You can't always tell someone's gender by looking at them, just like you can't always tell someone's political affiliation by looking at them. There are millions and millions of people who are born intersex. Being intersex is actually about as common as being born with red hair.
Of course he uses this statistic, which is proven to be false. So no, intersex people do not make up 1.7% of the population. The true prevalence of intersex is seen to be about 0.018%, almost 100 times lower than Sterling's estimate of 1.7%. This woman inflated this number to prove her point. And take a look at how she defined intersex. You could have just had problems with your ovaries or your testes, or your genitals weren't big enough, and that automatically qualified you as intersex, which of course is not an accurate way to calculate the percentage of intersex people. So yeah, this number has been proven to be false. But let's talk about the 0.018% of people who are intersex. Once again, it is an extremely rare medical anomaly. That doesn't mean that gender is now on a spectrum. Of course, there are cases of atypical sexual development, where something is wrong anatomically, and there are many combinations and different syndromes. Many of these individuals can't have children, they have incomplete testicular development, but as we've learned from Dr. Money, the best thing to do is to let these children grow up, and then most of these intersex people have no problem living as either a man or a woman. So yes, this is an anomaly, but it has nothing to do with you telling me that you don't feel like a man or a woman, which by the way you say has nothing to do with sex. Doctors have to look at the chromosomes and the reproductive system to determine the sex of the child. They aren't assigning them a gender, which is something you'll hear a lot of these activists say. Doctors see the primary sex characteristics and therefore see their sex. They don't flip a coin and say, oh, it's a boy. No, oh, it's a girl. And they certainly don't say, oh, it's a non-binary human, although they may choose to be something other than a human when they grow up, so let's not say that either. And if doctors did assign the children a gender, should they also assign them a race? Or maybe they shouldn't, because they could be transracial when they grow up. You may think that that sounds ridiculous, but race and gender is a fair comparison, because we're talking about biological reality.
I do find it very funny that a lot of the people who claim that trans people are trying to indoctrinate their children into religion from the day they're born.
Are you comparing gender ideology to religion, Mr. Beard? Or sorry, mixed beard? I think that's a new PC term for it, for like non-binary teachers. I remember seeing a TikTok about it.
I'm a non-binary elementary school teacher, so here's how I talk to my students about pronouns and such. Hi, my name is Mix K. It's Mix. So kind of like cookie mix.
For all those bigots who thought that there were still two genders, now you know.
And of course, now we're on to the indoctrination claim. I obviously do not think that any child should be pressured into being trans. Definitely not in the way that religious people pressure their children into being religious. Sorry.
You may think that indoctrination isn't happening, but this is all in the kids' education system now. How gender is actually chosen. There's drag story hour and reading children books about transgenderism. When they still think that they can grow up and become a giraffe, we're also telling them that they can grow up and become a boy. But unfortunately, there are parents who do raise their kids as non-binary, just for getting attention and virtue signaling. And you'd be surprised at how common this really is.
I do not think that anyone should ever be sent to prison for misgendering someone. All I think we should do is tell children that trans people exist, and then if one of them realizes that they are trans, then we should support them in whatever way the current psychological research shows is best. I do not think that they should get life-changing surgeries until they're an adult, and I do think that doctors should be educating trans people on the risks of gender-affirming surgeries.
That's great, but you're in the minority. There are so many people who think they should. In fact, you included an article that is advocating to allow kids to get that surgery.
But unlike Misha, I do think that trans children should be shown love, support, and validation so they're less likely to kill themselves.
Why unlike Misha? If I had a child who said that they were transgender, I would love them. I wouldn't disown them. A child came home and said that they are neither gender, I would try to talk some sense into them because I care about them. But by me not affirming their gender identity, to the left, that's like equivalent to a punch in the face.
The concept of gender dysphoria is very controversial in the trans community.
And it really shouldn't be.
In my opinion, gender dysphoria exists on a spectrum of intensity.
Of course, everything should be on a spectrum. Or like maybe you should be able to go to a therapist and get a diagnosis before getting the green light to get these life-changing surgeries. Otherwise, we'd go ahead and let these confused teenage girls get surgery and then later on regret it and become a detransitioner. Except that's already happening.
I don't think someone would change their gender identity without at least some level of discomfort with the gender they were assigned.
It doesn't matter what you think, because detransitioners are already coming out and saying that they didn't even need to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. They were just allowed to get surgery. Many are even suing their doctors now. I'd like to think it's not happening as well, Ryan, but it is.
What I mean by hair loss, and it just keeps getting worse, it keeps thinning, it keeps receding backward.
I was never uncomfortable with my gender. I was uncomfortable with, I'd say, my relationships.
Her voice drops from taking testosterone, it doesn't go back.
Because it's seen as progressive to let someone transition without a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and that's what's protecting the children and being tolerant. When in reality, this shouldn't be a partisan issue at all. Saying that yes, we should allow a child to get sterilized and go on hormones is not progressive, and I'm glad that you agree with me on that. But again, you're including articles that suggest that what you are saying right now is taking away trans people's rights. Plus, if you look within your non-binary community, I'm sure you'll find a plethora of activists who are advocating for this very thing. Plus, they have Big Pharma on their side, which is a very scary reality. And that's why I feel so compelled to talk about this, especially because of all the censorship going on surrounding speaking up about trans issues.
It all just depends on what gender label they feel expresses their experience of gender best. I really don't understand this idea that having more labels makes you cringe. Why can't we all just mind our own business and let people use whatever labels they want to use?
Because then you get suspended from university for not affirming their gender identity and respecting their labels. That's why. I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. I've talked to a lot of trans people who lean right, and I've never talked to a non-binary person who leans right. I think this has a lot to do with trans people still willing to accept biological reality. Because they have experienced gender dysphoria and choose to present female or choose to present male, they still acknowledge that they will always be biologically male or biologically female. But to alleviate their very real disorder, they choose to transition. But that doesn't mean that they're magically a woman now or a man because they have declared so. But if you all together tell me that you don't have a gender and that I am forced to affirm your gender identity because you're having some sort of identity crisis, then that's an issue. It's not my responsibility to affirm your identity.
Constantly telling trans people that they aren't valid has a direct negative impact on their mental health, which I care about improving because I care about everyone's mental health.
So let's talk about the high suicide rate within the trans community, because you can take a look at the numbers. Even with society becoming a lot more accepting of the trans community over the years, the suicide rate isn't decreasing. So perhaps me going along with your new identity of the week isn't really the solution. Maybe the solution has something to do more with getting therapy from a therapist who actually wants to help the individual get to the root cause of the problem instead of simply affirming their transgender identity within minutes, or else they're going to be labeled transphobic and then lose their license, which is happening. And I do have a problem with you saying that to be respectful, I have to be anti-scientific and allow people to police my language. And maybe we don't want a full-grown man in the women's restroom. If a man says he's a woman, then he's a woman, and he should be given access to female-only spaces, because there's no way to prove that he's not a woman, according to you. We can't take into consideration the way he looks. We can't ask his chromosomes because sex has nothing to do with gender. So all we can do is ask him. And if he says he's a woman, well, he's a woman. And that should be a genuine concern for us, because even if he isn't trans, he can be allowed in the women's restroom. And we can't question that because it's hate speech. And if you don't see an issue with that, I suggest you look into the cases in the high school bathrooms because of this gender policy.
Look, this conversation is just going to keep going around and around in circles because you care more about your right to be an asshole than you care about other people's feelings. And I know that you think it makes me weak, but I actually do care about people's feelings. So how about you pull your head out of your ass for 2 seconds and try being a decent human being?
This is what I've been waiting for. Is he gonna sing now?
You know, it's a pretty strange feeling making a commentary video trying to prove my own existence. If I can arrange my words in just the right way, and if I can make the perfect arguments, then I can convince more people that non-binary people exist.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I must say that the arguments were far from perfect.
I really don't think I'm asking for that much for people to see my gender as valid. I just want people to see Ryan when they look at me instead of seeing a man.
But you said so yourself that your gender expression is male. So what is your solution to making people see you as Ryan? I'm confused. Do you want people to just see you as your name?
I don't have to be a commentary creator. I made this video because I care about non-binary people. If I don't cover this topic, then it feels like I'm letting the other side win.
But according to you, you and I as commentators on YouTube only do it for attention. But now you're saying you're doing this for a larger purpose by trying to help non-binary people. But has it ever crossed your mind that I also care about the issues I'm talking about? Specifically children being allowed to get these surgeries and sharing these stories from detransitioners because mainstream media won't? Am I incapable of genuinely caring about these people just because we disagree on this particular issue?
And if I show any sort of emotion, if I get angry, if I show any sort of sign that all of this upsets me, then I'm triggered and I've lost the argument and the other side wins.
No, you can show emotions. In fact, you can scream facts at me, right? You can whisper them too. It doesn't matter as long as you're providing good arguments.
I am upset, and sometimes I just want to lay in a field and give up. I genuinely do not care if people like Misha see my gender as valid because she's built her entire career around invalidating people like me. I do like to think that I care about her on some level though. I want her to live a fulfilling life and I want her to be happy.
I wish you nothing but happiness as well.
How do I prove to you?
Well, apparently you can't. Yeah, I'm not convinced with this whole gender as a social construct and non-binary identity, but you seem like a fun person, Ryan. You're a great singer, and I appreciate the time and effort that you've obviously put into this video. Oh, and also, Ryan, that was an absolute bop. Maybe this whole thing was just a genius marketing strategy for this new song, and I can't blame him. I mean, I feel like I was just serenaded by angels, like non-binary angels. That was truly lovely. Wait, I just looked it up, and Ryan was on America's Got Talent in 2016. No, but in all seriousness, Ryan said something very true. I care more about my freedom of speech than someone's feelings. And you said so yourself, Ryan, that you agree with me.
I do think that protecting freedom of speech is more important than protecting people's right to be properly gendered.
So at the end of the day, I think that's what really matters. That you and I may disagree on this topic, but I believe that I have a right to speak about these important issues. And I believe that you have that very same right as well. And that's all for today's video, guys. Remember to comment your thoughts below. Remember to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss my next video. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.